time capsule containing Hitler merchandise we believe is from the 1900s.
Today's report is regarding women's place in society during the dictatorship of Adolf Hitler. During the Weimar Republic, women received a high standard of education, earned good wages and good jobs, and they could vote. But when the Nazi Party gained power, only men were allowed to make decisions, like they didn't allow German women to wear makeup, perm their hair, or colour it. Maybe this doesn't sound like a significant change, but compared to the previous things women could do, there's a big difference.
At Hitler's time, the women were looked down so much that they were awarded for having many children. It was called the Mother's Cross, and it was awarded on the 12th of August 1938, birthday of Hitler's mother. This is what they were awarded: bronze for having 5 children, silver for having 6 to 7 children, gold for having 8 or more children.
One of the earliest laws passed by Hitler was the law for the encouragement of marriage. This law stated that all newly married couples would get a government loan of 1,000 marks, which was about a 9 months average income. 800,000 newlyweds took this offer and they didn't have to pay it back.
1 child meant that 25% didn't have to be paid back. 2 children meant 50% didn't have to be paid back. And 4 children meant the entire loan was cleared. The initial aim of this was to encourage people to have as many children as possible. This was a long-term plan. The more children, the more young boys and girls. The young boys would grow up to be soldiers and the girls would grow up to be young mothers.
What was it like for Jews and other minorities during Nazi Germany?
In 1933, Adolf Hitler became a chancellor, which would start the stages of persecution towards the people Hitler disliked. During this time, the Nazi Party had their racial ideology. The Nazis believed that the Germans were racially superior and that the Jews, Gypsies, black racists, homosexuals, and that the mentally or physically disabled were a serious threat to the German society and their race, that they called the master race. This radical views would contribute to how these group of people were mistreated in the future and how they were viewed by the Nazi Germany society.
By 1934, all Jewish shops were marked with the Star of David or the word Jude, and by 1935 and 1936, doctors, dentists, journalists, or Jews in the armed forces were banned from their jobs, leaving the pure Germans to replace the Jews' jobs. Hitler also passed a law called the Nuremberg Law, which meant that Jews didn't have the right to be German citizens or marry them. This meant Jews around Germany were targeted as soon as they were disqualified again.
On the 9th and 10th of November 1938, the Nazis vandalized Jewish properties by destroying 7,500 shop windows, burned down 400 synagogues, and arrested 30,000 Jews and sent them to concentration camps. This was called the Night of the Broken Glass, Kristallnacht, and the Jews were forced to pay the damage that was inflicted on them. This sudden violence warned the Jews of Hitler's and the Nazis' views towards them was a growing protestation of violence. By 1939, all Jews were forced to sell their businesses, give their jewelry and metals to the Nazis. This shows how much authority the Nazis and Hitler had over the Jewish people of Nazi Germany. This build up to Hitler's power also came with the authority over the Jewish people of Germany. The mentally and physically disabled were persecuted by the Nazis because they would consider them to be an obstruction to the Nazi plan. That was the Aryan race. To their advantage, they were rarely sent to concentration camps, but the Nazis did create sterilization programs. Most of the people sent for sterilization were in the mental hospitals and various other institutions. In 1934, 30,000 to 40,000 people were sterilized. The Nazi program had lots of support from the people affected due to the propaganda campaigns. These adverts emphasized on the cost and care for the disabled. In 1939, the euthanasia program was introduced as the Nazi plan. This plan included exterminating the mentally and physically disabled. Due to protest and encouragement from Nazi members, the program was stopped in August 1941. However, doctors continued killing disabled patients through starvation, poisoning, or injections. Roma, or otherwise known as Gypsies, have been long persecuted in Germany and Europe in general. The Nazis perceived them to be racially undesirable because of Hitler's belief of the Aryan race and their way of life. Many Gypsies were deprived of their civil rights and sent to ghettos or concentration camps. Not just that, but Gypsies were also used in medical experiments and injected lethal substances against their will. 30,000 Gypsies were deported to the East in the space of 4 years, 1939 to 1943. For Aryan Germans who married Gypsies, the Gypsies were excused, but they had no choice but to be sterilized. This stopped them from having children, and in the Nazis' perspective, stopped them from expanding their race. Before World War I, Germans struggled with the idea of having black Germans, even though around that time interracial marriage was legal. In Mein Kampf, Hitler described the children belonging to someone of African origin as being a contamination of the right race. A quote from the book reads, "By Negro blood on the Rhine, in the heart of Europe." Hitler also held the Jews responsible, stating that the Jews were responsible for bringing Negroes into the Rhineland, with the ultimate idea of corrupting the white race, which they hate, thus lowering its cultural and political level so that the Jews might dominate. Hitler also implied that it was a plot on France too, since their population was being negrified. Due to the Nuremberg laws that forbade marriage or sexual relations between people who could produce racially suspect offspring on November 14, 1935, later on the minister interpreted this to be relations between those of German or related blood and black Gypsies and their children. As to this, these people were socially isolated and they were treated as non-Aryans along with the Jews, Gypsies, homosexuals, and the mentally and physically unstable. Although the Nazis exterminated the Jews and Gypsies, black people were to be segregated and eventually exterminated through compulsory surgical methods such as sterilization. For homosexuals in Nazi Germany, Hitler's power would show and influence how they lived their life. In 1933, gay organizations were banned, school books about homosexuality and sexuality in general were burned, and homosexuals within the Nazi Party were murdered. The Gestapo made a list of homosexuals who were compelled to sexually conform to their German norm. Between 1933 and 1945, an estimated 100,000 men were arrested for being homosexuals, and half were officially sentenced. Most of these men served time in regular prisons, but 5,000 to 15,000 of those sentenced were sent to concentration camps, and it's estimated up to 60% perished in the camps. As they were homosexuals and didn't follow the German norm, they were treated in an unusually cruel manner by their captors.
Today's report.
One of the earliest laws passed a government loan of 1,000 marks, which
At Hitler's time, women were looked down upon so much that they were rewarded for having many children. At Hitler's time, women... Can you shut up?
I didn't start the video.